So, I have been sitting with a calling in my heart since 1997. On the 31st of August 1997, Diana, the Princess of Wales, died in a car crash in Paris. Most people, because it was such a significant event, can remember exactly where they were on the day. I remember going to church in the morning because it was a Sunday, the 31st of August 1997. But that evening, something much more spectacular happened in my life. And that was, believe it or not, Colin, I, at the age of 16, got to play the organ in church for the very first time. They only trusted me with an evening service because at the Methodist Church in Somerset West there were only about 10 people in the congregation on a Sunday evening, and that would include the minister and organist, now that I come to think of it. And so if I really messed up, I would be able to not be too embarrassed. The scandal would be very limited because there would only be 8 people staring at me playing the wrong notes on that old Lowry organ. I remember being very short. I'm still short. I was even shorter 27 years ago, and I couldn't reach the B pedal, and I constantly had to put my neck in spasm trying to get the B pedal here, which I later gave up on. So I tried to find another pedal which would fit into the musical chord, because it took me another year or two to actually get to the B pedal in time. I mention that story because it's quite interesting how my first playing the organ in church in 1997 coincided with this calling that started so very definitely to crystallize deep within me. I was very clever then. I can't say that about myself now. I suppose it's quite debatable, but I was quite a bit of a slim cop back in the 90s, and there was all sorts of speculation of what I would do post-matric, what course I would follow, and what direction I would take. And I had I heard little whispers of my aunts and those in the community saying, he's probably going to do medicine. He'll probably become a lawyer. Or I've heard that he's great at accounting. He's going to probably become nothing else and nothing less than a CA. I wasn't 100% sure of this calling, although it was starting to haunt me day and night. And I decided to make it a case between me and God. And so, from my standard 8 year, which would now be grade 10, from my standard 8 year right up to my standard 9 year, I decided to fast. And I decided to fast every Thursday from 8 in the morning to 6 in the evening. And for 52 Thursdays, for all 4 seasons, I fasted. You see, I wanted to be certain. I didn't want to make this big announcement to say to everybody, oh, look at me, I'm going to become a minister, and then change my mind and maybe become a circus clown, which I have no doubt I would be brilliant at. The Lord confirmed over and over and over again that this was His plan and will for my life. My heart resonated with it. There was no getting away from it. And no, it wasn't a dramatic calling. I can't claim that I saw a burning bush, or that I heard an audible voice from the sky saying, Bevan, you will become a minister. There was none of that. There was, however, this unshakable knowing that if I did take any other route, that I wouldn't be happy. And you know what? I still feel like that. 26 and a half years later. I have known for the last 2.5 decades that if I ever left the ministry, that I wouldn't be happy. Although in one of my foolish moments, I made a bit of a wrong decision exactly 10 years ago. The church became too much for me and I felt totally and utterly overwhelmed by the demands on me. And so I actually took a secondment from the Methodist Church. I then decided to dabble in motivational speaking. I joined a company in Port Elizabeth. They paid me well and I spoke well, so I thought it would be a perfect marriage. I hadn't resigned from the Methodist Church then. I had only taken a year's secondment. And of course, by March that year, if not by February, I was dreadfully, dreadfully unhappy. Earning 6,000 rand a day was not even cutting it. All I wanted to do was to run back to the Methodist Church and say to them, find me a congregation. I want to serve. I want to preach. I want to be with the people of God. The Methodist Church then did take me back and sent me to Middelburg. It was like my sins were catching up on me. I remember how my story began. I am a PV boy. Parvillay High in Somerset West used to be one of the top 100 schools in the country. Of course it was before all these newer schools started popping up all over the place. But I was very proud to be a PV boy, and in 1999 I matriculated. And I remember saying to friends who wouldn't understand that I was going to enter plumbing. Immediately after matric, I started trying to find out what a road in ministry would look like. And I soon learned that it wouldn't be easy. And I soon learned that there would be a very dear price to pay. And I soon learned that it would be either all or nothing. The Methodist Church's training system at the time was 7 years. And I could only start that after 3 or 4 years of youth ministry, because after matric, when I applied for the ordained ministry in the Methodist Church, they said to me, with quite a chuckle in their voice, Bevan, you are too young. We don't want children as our ministers. Go and gain a bit of life experience and come and talk to us again in 3 or 4 years' time. Which then duly I did. You see, the calling was either going to stay and become stronger or vanish into thin air altogether. That's probably what the church was trying to say to me. Go and test your calling. Luckily, there was a position of youth pastor open at Strand Methodist Church. I applied and I got the job. I mean, who could say no to this? And so I served there for 4 years very happily, and it's still a church which is very close to my heart. After lots of consideration and lots of prayer and even more fasting, I then, later in 2004, decided to undergo the candidature process, where you become a candidate for the ministry, where you have to go through all sorts of things in order to get the tick next to your name. The church, for instance, sent me to 2 doctors, their own doctor and my own private doctor, to give the bill of okay, making sure that I am fit enough for what lay ahead. Not only did I have to see medical doctors, I also had to go and see the church's psychologist to check whether I am mentally and emotionally ready and strong enough to be a clergyman. There were countless examinations and trial services and screening committees, which we have called, of course, called screaming committees, because they asked very difficult questions. I still don't know quite how I made it through all of that, but I did. I then heard that the church would add a title to my name, that of Reverend, and that I would have the privilege of wearing a clerical collar, which I of course don't anymore. I think it's a bit old school. But if I wanted to, I could. So the church dressed me up and sent me on my way, and my first station, we call a congregation stations in the Methodist Church. My first station was in Janssenville in the Great Karoo. I remember the bishop phoning me and telling me that I would go to Janssenville, and I had to get out my dad's road map book to see where it was. And I remember it was, if you look at the page, it was on A7 and H3, and I had to get the coordinates right, and there was this little spot of Janssenville, 183 kilometers west of PE and 84 kilometers east of Graaff-Reinet. That particular area of the Great Karoo is called the Noersveld, because there's a specific kind of cactus which grows only there called the Noer, and it's the very cactus in which the Angora goats get caught in without being able to escape, because if their felt catches onto those thorns, there's no way of escaping unless a farmer actually comes to cut them loose. And so I was given 5 congregations. The Methodist Church at the time had a policy that ministers who were English speaking would be placed cross-culturally. So I actually ended up in a Xhosa-speaking congregation. Not only did I have to look after the Janssenville church, I also had a church in Stateleville, a church in Kliplaat, and 2 farms called Waterford and Driekop. And as harrowing as a place like Janssenville may sound, it was one of the happiest years of my ministry. And I trust that I am soon to be as happy, if not more happy, here in Hermanus as I was 20 years ago in Janssenville. The weather was a challenge. I remember one summer's day, the thermometer went up to 45 degrees Celsius. I will never forget it. It's melted, excuse the pun, it's melted into my brain. And of course in winter it would often go down to -3, -4. There is something about that kind of person who lives in the Karoo, however. They are just different, humble, generous. I'm not saying you are not humble or generous or both, but I think you know what I'm getting at. It's a different kind of attitude to life. And they looked after me wonderfully, and I still have the shells of about 5 ostrich eggs as proof of how generous they were and how nicely they looked after me. After Janssenville, I went to finish my studies in Pretoria. The church offered to pay for the studies, so I continued after my BTH in ministry degree. Methodist ministers now don't only study theology, you study theology and ministry. So my degree was not the BTH, it was actually BTH and Min, because you do practical stuff of ministry as well, like how to lead a Benedictine spiritual retreat, or how to put together an HIV workshop. So there's a lot of practical stuff included in that degree, and that's why the words "and ministry" have been added to it. Because the church was paying, I then went on with an honors degree, and there I focused on eschatology, which is the study of the end times. You know, in studies one have all these ologies, So I had to study things like soteriology, which is the study of salvation, anthropology, the studies of humans, pneumatology, the study of the Holy Spirit. And of course I decided to focus mostly on eschatology, which is the study of the end times. It comes from the Greek word eschaton, and there isn't an English equivalent for that word. The closest we have in the English language would be destiny. So eschatology is the study of the end times. And I actually wrote my thesis in realized eschatology, which I will explain to you another day. When the church said that they would continue to pay for a few more years, I then decided to do a diploma in narrative therapy. And so I continued with that and completed it, and then I was done. Even if the church offered to pay for a master's, I was just indescribably exhausted. And so you need to know that the minister who stands in front of you is well learned. Because I'm so jokey and playful, sometimes my education gets lost in the conversation. It's rather important for me to know that you know that I haven't just kind of sprung up out of nowhere like so many self-declared pastors all over the place nowadays. I have come with solid training. Not only do I have those 2 degrees and the diploma, the church also really grilled us by sending us on all sorts of other courses. So I have been trained in every topic and issue imaginable. The church would also make sure that they would not ordain anybody who hadn't completed all of their training to the full. So when it came to the sacraments, when it came to church finances, when it came to the studies of John and Charles Wesley, the founders of the Methodist movement, when it came to church polity, meaning the constitution of the church, they rigorously trained us in every area. So by the time I arrived at my ordination in East London with 52 other ordinands, the church knew that when they put their stamp on me, that I was ready for that massive step. And so there was this triumphant celebration. There's no church in East London which could seat 5,000 people, so they had to hire a warehouse in the industrial area and make it look like a church. There were 52 of us, or 53 of us, being ordained on that day, and I'm quite flattered to say to you that I was the only coloured in the group. There were 49 Africans and 3 Europeans, and I was the only coloured being ordained on that fateful day, and it's something that I hold very precious to my heart. It was the 26th of September 2010. It was that same year in which we had hosted the Soccer World Cup. It was such a nerve-wracking experience for me to be ordained, to stand at what wouldn't have been a real altar, but the sanctuary part of the warehouse. They had created an altar and a communion rail and so on. To stand there with 7 other ministers, most of them bishops, placing their hands on me, sealing me for what we call the ministry of word and sacrament. And of course there were endless promises that I had to lay down. So the presiding bishop, who's the head of the Methodist Church, would stand there in all his robes and he would ask the question, and we would have to say as ordinands, with God's help we will, or this and that. The answers were there in front of us. And I remember to this day how much I shook, because that was the moment that I had been preparing for, not only for the 8 years that led up to that, but since 1997, when I first started feeling that calling pushing up inside. I remember some of the great Wesleyan hymns that were sung at my ordination service. Behold the servant of the Lord. It's not a well-known hymn, but it's a very profound hymn, and maybe we'll learn it when it comes to the anniversary of my ordination one day. O thou who camest from above, which is a Pentecostal hymn. It speaks of how the Holy Spirit needs to come onto one's heart and there kindle a fire of sacred flame on the mean altar of your heart. And of course there were lots of celebrations that followed, and I had to constantly remind myself that ordination wasn't a step of arrival. It was just one step, although an important one, in a much bigger and larger journey. It wasn't the end of a path. If anything, it was a beginning. I was serving in Port Elizabeth at the time, and then the church sent me to Johannesburg. Then I took that year off that I mentioned earlier. Then served a year in Middelburg in the Transvaal. And then I applied for a position at Somerset West United Church at the end of 2015, which of course was quite different for me, because leaving the Methodist Church was a very sad thing for me. The Methodist Church is my spiritual mother, always will be. But I just knew in my heart that I needed to make that change. The fact that Somerset West was my hometown had absolutely nothing to do with it. And so I applied for that job as the second minister at Somerset West United Church. And I got it, and I started there on 1 January 2016. I spent 7 blessed years amongst those people there. But I always knew that sad day would come where my road would change direction once again. And so in 2021, I started dreaming of becoming the minister here, amongst you. The special people in the special town. I thought the journey towards it. I cannot in words describe to you the hell that this church board and some of you put me through. And yet I was still spellbound enough to take it. I knew that I would work with Ken for a year, that we would form the ministry team in this place, but I also knew that he would retire in 2024. For that's what the constitution of this church says. When a minister reaches 70, he or she would retire, and it was the case for James in October 2022, and of course it was now the case for Ken. He turned 70 in April, and remember, he's officially employed by us until 30 April, although he's been granted long leave, which we owed him. And that's why he retired, semi-retired this past Sunday. And so now it feels to me as if I have to pinch myself, because it feels like I'm lost in some kind of dream. This day that I have worried about, this day that I have prayed into, has finally arrived. And I'm not sure if I'm ready for it. Maybe I will never be ready for it. And that is why I decided to not preach a scriptural sermon today. I would rather want to, and I'm doing this on Sunday again at 8 and at 10, I would rather introduce myself to you. I would rather let you in on a little bit of the journey that I have been through to get where I am today. And towards the end of this speech, I want to make sure that you know how committed I am to you, to serving you, to praying for you, to breaking bread with you, to washing your feet. That is what I feel called to do. 2 Saturdays ago, I met with the board in a very long morning meeting where we discussed and deliberated about where the church should go. Of course, when a lot of people are together, there are many ideas and many questions and many suggestions, and I'm not sure if we have done all that work, but it certainly is in the process. We're having a second session this Saturday, and I need you to pray for us. For I, of course, have this grand vision for United Church Hermanus. Some of the people who are with me in the leadership have other visions. But I want to make this thing very clear. That it's not about the board's vision, or even about Bevan's vision for United Hermanus. We need to seek what the Lord's will is for this congregation at a time such as this. And I will absolutely insist on that. And so once we have spoken as a board on Saturday, we will invite you to a prayer day which will be held here at the church on Saturday the 17th. We will open the doors at 7 in the morning and we will close the doors at 7 in the evening, and I expect everybody to come along for at least 30 minutes. And here on a table in front there will be notes available to you to guide you through that half an hour of prayer. As we call upon God's name, as we seek God's mind for this congregation. It's going to be so cute if we have lots of plans, like a bazaar, for instance, or a food festival, or other ideas with which I've come. And I must say, I've come with some really lekker ideas. But those alone will not be enough. I want the Holy Spirit to go ahead of us and to carve out a future for this congregation. And I want us to only go there where He leads. I want to ask you for a few things today. Firstly, I want to ask you to pray for me. To pray for me indefatigably. If there's a word I would use to describe myself, it would be the word human. I don't know, I think this is the baggage we have of the old days. People put ministers on a pedestal and you think that we are more special, or that we're closer to God, or that we have a hotline, or we understand the Bible better, and maybe we do slightly because of our training. But let me tell you, the same frustrations that you feel, I feel. The same challenges that you have in your relationship with Jesus, I also have. And being at the helm of such a strong congregation with so many opinionated people can be quite something. So I want you to pray for divine wisdom for me and for divine courage. For it looks like you're going to have to put up with me for many more years. I mean, I'm only turning 70 in 28 years. Oh, you know how old I am. 27 and a half years, Lynn. If you want to be technical. So I'm going to be here for the foreseeable future. So we probably have to spend quite a bit of time and energy making sure that we have a good relationship. Because I am your pastor. I am your spiritual director. I'm the one who sets the pace in this place. And I want to honor my position here by always being a man of prayer myself, and always heavily relying on you covering me in prayer as well. The second thing I want to ask is not only prayer, it's also for patience. I'm going to make mistakes because I'm human. I'm going to do things that annoy you. It looks like an inevitable thing. Hey Malcolm, didn't that happen to you in your ministry? Where you actually did things that really irritated people? Sometimes the majority of people. Never happened to you?
Oh yes.
Malcolm and I are having dinner together this evening. It looks like he's got some horror stories to tell. Some of the ideas I come up with won't suit everybody. I can tell you that now. Some of the vision will make you maybe a bit uncomfortable. Some of it will be a challenge to you because now maybe you need to come to church at 8 o'clock and not 8:30. Or maybe, do you get where I'm going? Some of it you'll think, gosh, Bevan has lost it, he's mad. Why has he made this decision? I'm going to need you to be patient and I'm going to need you to trust me as the resident theologian in this place. In the Methodist Church, the board outside the church would always say resident minister, and I always change that because I believe that we are all called to be ministers in our own right. We are all pastors, we are all servants. But I see myself as the resident theologian. I oversee the theology here. And when I note that there's some of our theology which is questionable, I will alter it. The last thing I want to ask from you is for your participation, for your partnership, as Desmond Tutu would probably call it. Remember, he always went on about how God needed partners, that if God's kingdom is to come in the world, if God's work is to be done, God is not going to do it alone. The way that God chooses to work in is the way of partnership with humans. And the Bible is a great testimony to that. Through the eons, God has used humans to get His work done. I need you to pray for me. I need you to be patient. And I need you to participate. A church cannot run by itself. We actually need people physically available to pour the tea. For people to actually be present on a Sunday at the door to welcome worshippers as they arrive. There's some stuff that is tough to do, that's hard, like preaching. I can't put any of you here and say, do a sermon. There are those with that gift and skill. But I want you to start thinking about where you can be involved. And I'm going to hammer this with the Sunday congregation this coming week. Because we are desperate for more volunteers. Debbie can tell you which lists we have there at her desk which have no names on them. Because people haven't come forward and said, I will help with this and I will do this. I can lead this church all I like. But if you don't put up your hand and say, Bevan, you can use me, then this church will go nowhere. I'm grateful to men like Malcolm, like James, like Ken, like others who have served here, having handed over to me a church with incredible potential. I need you to allow me the opportunity now to grow what we have, to delve into you, so that something breathtaking will emerge. I need all hands on deck if we want to make this church even more spectacular than it already is. I cannot do it without you. It's impossible. In one of his letters to Timothy, I'm ending now, in one of his letters to Timothy, Paul makes a very dramatic statement. He says, you know what? I'm being poured out like a drink offering for the sake of the people of God. And never before in my 19-year ministry have I felt that so acutely than here, as here. I feel like I am currently being poured out like a drink offering for your sake. I wouldn't want to spend my life doing anything else. His Majesty King Charles III made a moving speech to the world at his mother's death on the 8th of September 2022. Of course, remember, when the Queen died, he immediately ascended to the throne because the throne can never be empty. So he was picking mushrooms in the garden at Balmoral when his mother was dying, and somebody from the bedroom phoned him and said, "Not Your Royal Highness any longer, Your Majesty. Your mother has just died. The Queen is dead. God save the King." Anyway, on that evening of the Queen's death, when the world was so sad and shocked that Her Majesty had gone, the King referred in his speech to the fact that the Queen had died in Scotland. Because apparently that was her wish, that when she went, that it would be in her beloved Scotland. And he actually said something to the effect of, Scotland could not be closer to my mother's heart. And today I want to end this talk by saying that I am yours. I am your servant. I love you with all my heart. I am committed to your well-being. For this church, Hermanus United, could not be closer to mine.